The universe of the generation ship Hearth was measured in rust and silence. For centuries, it had drifted, a colossal metal ghost in an endless so-forgotten night. Its original mission, a desperate flight from a dying Earth to a promised star, was less than a memory. It was a heresy, a myth whispered by madmen in the dark. The 500 kilometers of its cylindrical body was the only world its inhabitants knew, a world of tiered decks and artificial gravity that felt as natural as breathing. At the pinnacle, in the sterile, white corridors of the spire, lived the navigators. They were the keepers of the faith, a quasi-religious order who interpreted the ship's groans and shudders as the will of the great ship spirit. They preached adherence to the cycle, the reclamation of water, the recycling of nutrients, the conservation of light. To them, the ship was not a vessel, it was a god, and its slow, inevitable decay was the sacred, unalterable text of their lives. Below them, in the perpetual twilight of the lower decks, lived the dwellers. They were the gears of the great machine, a swarming mass of humanity subsisting on algae paste and recycled air, their lives governed by the flickering lumen panels and the pronouncements of the navigators. And even further down, in the skeletal, unlit bowels of the ship, was the hull grave. It was a place of ghosts and forbidden knowledge, a graveyard of dead technology and forgotten purpose where the outcasts known as scrappers risked their lives. Kalen was a scrapper. He moved through the darkness of the hull grave not with faith, but with an intimate knowledge of pressure groans and the scent of ozone that preceded a power surge. He was young, but his eyes held the weary cynicism of an old man who had seen too many sons die. Except Kalen had never seen a son at all. He salvaged copper wiring, intact memory chips, and filtration components from the dead and dreaming sections of the ship, trading them topside for water rations and nutrient packs. It was a life measured in calculated risks and fleeting gains. He did not believe in the ship spirit, but he believed in the finality of a hull breach and the cold hunger that gnawed at his belly. He was haunted by the memory of Alara, his mentor, an old woman with hands scarred from 1,000 salvage panels. She was the one who had spoken of the outside, of a vast emptiness filled with points of light called stars. She had shown him a faded schematic, a heresy she kept hidden in the lining of her coat, that depicted the hearth not as a world, but as an arrow fired into an infinite black. The navigators had taken her for her blasphemy, her body given back to the reclaimers to be rendered into nutrients for the cycle. Kalen had learned his lesson well. Hope was a current that could get you killed. Then, the silence broke. It started not as a sound, but as a feeling, a deep thrum that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. It was a resonance the ship had not made in his lifetime. In the spire, the navigators saw their delicate instruments flicker, ancient needles quivering behind dusty glass. Deep within the ship's core, a system that had been dormant for 500 years, the long-range communications array surged with power. It wasn't receiving a random signal, it was answering a call. An automated ping, sent out centuries ago into the void, had finally reached its target and returned, bringing a ghost home with it. The probe, a relic of the original mission named the Wanderer, had found something. The signal it sent back was unlike anything the navigator's doctrine could explain. It was not language. It was a complex, evolving waveform, a torrent of pure data that flowed through the hearth's dormant systems like blood into a corpse's veins. In the hull grave, lumen panels that had been dark for a century flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows. The air, usually thick with the smell of stale metal and decay, seemed to thin, carrying a faint, clean scent like the memory of rain. The navigators in their sterile sanctums were paralyzed by terror. Their sacred texts had no chapter for this. The ship's spirit was either angry or dying. High Navigator Corvus, a man whose piety was matched only by his cruelty, declared the phenomenon the Void Blight, a spiritual sickness born of heresy. He ordered a purge. His black-robed enforcers swept through the lower decks, seeking out anyone who spoke of the change, anyone whose eyes held a flicker of forbidden curiosity. The scrappers, who lived on the edge of heresy by default, were the first to be hunted. Kalen was deep in Sector Gamma 9 prying a functional heatsink from a derelict cryopod. When the signal found him, he was near an old communications relay, a web of dead fiber optics that snaked through the ship's spine. When the wave of data washed over him, it wasn't an external sound, it was an invasion. His vision fractured, replaced by flashes of impossible things. He saw a burning sphere of golden fire hanging in a blackness so complete it felt like a physical weight. He saw swirling clouds of incandescent dust, cosmic veils of purple and blue. He saw alien landscapes under alien suns. These were not pictures, they were experiences, memories of a place he had never been, flooding his mind with a sensory overload that drove him to his knees. His hands clamped over his ears as if to block a sound that was already inside his skull. In the chaotic stream of information, one image held clear a silver sphere, the probe from Ilara's stories, floating in the void. But it was no longer just a machine. Its smooth metallic surface was now veined with a crystalline, lattice-like structure that pulsed with a soft, internal light. It looked less like it was built and more like it had grown. A voice, not of words but of pure intent, echoed in the core of his being. It spoke of a journey, of a destination called Proxima Centauri. It spoke of humanity not as scavengers in a dying machine, but as explorers, pioneers, travelers. It whispered the greatest heresy of all the hearth was not a world. It was a ship. It was a cage. And the key to opening it had just returned. The signal's influence grew stronger with each passing cycle. Throughout the lower decks, dwellers began to report strange, vivid dreams of falling through an endless sky. Children drew pictures of circles and dots on the grimy walls, patterns that looked eerily like star charts. The ship itself seemed to be healing. The air filtration systems in the dweller sectors began to optimize, running with an efficiency not seen in generations. The navigators took credit, proclaiming it a reward for their swift action against the heretics, all while their fear curdled into frantic paranoia. They could not control it, and anything they could not control, they had to destroy. Kalen understood then. The signal from the Wanderer wasn't just a message. It was a command protocol, an override from a past that refused to stay dead. It was trying to awaken the ship, and in doing so, awaken its people. He thought of Ilara's faded schematic. The layout of the ship burned into his memory. The one place that could receive and process a signal of this magnitude. The one place that held the master controls for every system on the hearth was the bridge. It was the holiest of holies, a sanctuary sealed by the first navigators, its entrance rumored to be hidden somewhere in the spire, guarded by lethal countermeasures and unshakable dogma. To reach it was impossible. But as navigator patrols swept through the hull grave, their lumen torches cutting sharp, accusatory paths through the darkness, Kalen knew that staying put was a death sentence. He was the epicenter of the heresy now, a living antenna for the Void Blight. They would hunt him, dissect him, and burn what was left as a warning. He had just managed to slip into a ventilation shaft, his heart hammering against his ribs. As a patrol passed beneath him, their voices echoing off the cold metal, he could feel the pulse of the Wanderer in his blood, a steady, insistent rhythm that spoke of open spaces and distant light. It was a promise of something more, but a promise wrapped in terror, clinging to the darkness, the ghosts of Ilara's words guiding him. He made his choice. He would not die in the dark. He would chase the ghost's signal upward, through the stratified layers of his world, to the one place that might hold the answers. He set his sights on the engineering spire, the first and most dangerous step on an impossible pilgrimage to the heart of the machine, a journey to a heaven he wasn't sure he even believed in. The ascent from the hull grave was a climb out of hell and into purgatory. Kalen moved through a labyrinth of rusted service ladders and echoing maintenance shafts, the darkness of his home giving way to the oppressive, perpetual twilight of the lower decks. The air changed first. The cold, sterile scent of dead machinery was replaced by a thick, humid atmosphere, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, nutrient paste, and recycled water. Then came the sound, a constant, low-level roar that was the sum of 1,000,000 lives packed into a space meant for a fraction of that number. It was the sound of humanity's cage, and it was deafening. He emerged from a ventilation grate into the heart of a dweller market, a chaotic river of people flowing through a wide corridor lit by sputtering lumen panels. Here, life was a desperate, vibrant tapestry of trade and survival. Merchants hawked protein bars made from processed fungus. Technicians offered to repair failing personal data slates for a portion of a water ration. And information brokers with haunted eyes whispered rumors in the shadows. For a moment, Kalen was paralyzed. The sheer density of people, the press of flesh, the cacophony of voices, it was a sensory assault after the solitary silence of the hull grave. He pulled his hood low, trying to make himself small, a ghost in a crowd of ghosts. But he was different now. The signal from the Wanderer was a constant, low-frequency hum in the back of his mind, a second pulse beneath his own heartbeat. It made him a beacon, and he could feel the subtle shifts in the crowd as he passed. Some people, their faces etched with a new and unfamiliar anxiety, would glance at him, their eyes widening for a second in confused recognition before they quickly looked away. They were the dreamers, the ones who had seen the impossible skies. The navigators' enforcers were a stark, terrifying presence. They moved in pairs, clad in black, form-fitting armor that absorbed the dim light, their faces hidden behind polished, emotionless masks. They carried stun mauls that crackled with blue energy, and they moved with a purpose that parted the sea of dwellers like a knife. Kalen saw them drag a man from a noodle stall, his only crime, the frantic, wide-eyed wonder with which he described a dream of falling through a field of diamonds. The man didn't scream. He just stared up at the grimy ceiling as if he could see right through it, a look of sublime terror on his face as the enforcers beat him into submission, Fear was the navigator's primary currency, and their wealth was growing. The signal chose that moment to surge. As Kalen pressed himself into a recess, his breath catching in his throat, the world dissolved. The market, the enforcers, the oppressive ceiling, it all vanished, replaced by a vision of dizzying scale. He was outside again, but this time he was not just an observer. He was the wanderer. He felt the cold of the void on his crystalline skin, the silent pull of distant gravity. He saw the hearth as it truly was, a colossal, pitted spear of metal, its hull scarred by micrometeorites, its engines cold and dead. It wasn't a god, it was a tomb, adrift and silent. Then, his perspective spun, and he saw what the probe had found. A star system, vibrant and alive. He saw a planet, a jewel of blue and white and green, so achingly beautiful it felt like a physical blow. It was the destination from Illyra's schematic Proxima Centauri b, the promised land. But the vision was tainted. A shadow lay over the planet, a subtle wrongness he couldn't define, and he felt a presence, an intelligence that was not human, watching from the darkness between the stars. It was ancient, vast, and utterly indifferent. The vision shattered, and he was back in the market, gasping for air, sweat stinging his eyes. An enforcer was staring directly at him, head tilted. His mask hid his expression, but Kalen felt the cold, analytical focus of a predator. He had been standing motionless, his eyes unfocused, for who knew how long. He turned and fled, pushing his way into the thickest part of the crowd, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The signal was a guide, but it was also a brand, marking him for the hunters. He stumbled through narrow, winding corridors, his mind a chaotic jumble of alien starlight and immediate, gut-wrenching fear. He needed a place to hide, to think. He found himself in a quieter section of the decks, a place where the main thoroughfares gave way to a maze of residential hab-blocks. Here, the walls were covered in faded murals depicting the Great Cycle, a serpent eating its own tail, the central dogma of the navigator's faith. It was in the shadow of one of these murals that a hand shot out and grabbed his arm. He spun, his hand instinctively reaching for the sharpened piece of rebar he kept tucked in his belt. But the grip was surprisingly gentle. It was a woman, older than his mother would have been, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "You have the void sickness," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "I saw it on your face. You see the sky fire." Kalen tried to pull away, but she held firm. The navigators hunt those with the sky fire. They take them to the spire. They don't come back. But there are others. We are learning to hide it. She guided him into a small alcove hidden behind a tapestry of woven wires. It was a tiny space, barely large enough for two people, filled with the scent of dried herbs and ozone. She introduced herself as Anya, a storyteller, a keeper of the histories the navigators tried to erase. "The dreams are a gift," she said, her eyes burning with a fervent light that was part madness, part revelation. They are the ship spirit's true voice, not the lies Corvus preaches. It is waking up, and it is calling its children home. Kalen, a creature of pragmatism and disbelief, found himself at a loss for words. "It's not a spirit," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "It's a signal." From a machine. Anya smiled, a slow, knowing expression. What is a machine but a body? What is a signal but a voice? You see the wires. But I see the message. You're trying to go up. To the engineering spire. The dreams have been showing us the way. Whispering of the heart of the ship. Kaelin stared at her. How do you know? Because it is where all the awakened are being called, she replied simply. But the way is blocked. Corvus has sealed the main transit shafts. His new purifiers guard the access points. They are not like the enforcers. They are zealots, chosen for their cruelty and their absolute faith. They say they can smell heresy. She provided him with a small, hard pellet of nutrient paste and a cup of lukewarm, reclaimed water. It was the first act of selfless kindness he had experienced in years, and it unsettled him more than the threat of the purifiers. Anya was the hub of a nascent network of dreamers. They communicated through coded messages, symbols scrawled on walls that looked like idle graffiti to the uninitiated. They were disorganized, frightened, but they were the beginning of a resistance, an antibody forming in the bloodstream of the hearth. She told him of a forgotten maintenance conduit, one that bypassed the main security checkpoints to the engineering spire. It was a dangerous route, running adjacent to one of the main power conduits. A single misstep could mean instant incineration. The purifiers run a diagnostic sweep of the area every 12th cycle, she explained, her fingers tracing a map on the dusty floor. But there is a flaw, a blind spot that lasts for less than a minute. If you move then, you might make it. It was a desperate plan, a scrapper's gamble. Anya offered him more than just a route. She offered him a purpose. He wasn't just running for his own life anymore. He was carrying the hope of every dweller who had dreamt of an open sky. Others will create a diversion at the main checkpoint, she said. A protest, a riot. They will draw the enforcers. It will give you the time you need. They are willing to sacrifice themselves for the message you carry. The weight of that sacrifice settled on Kaelin, a burden heavier than any piece of salvage. He was no prophet. He was just a survivor. But looking into Anya's unwavering eyes, he saw the reflection of Ilara's faith, the belief in something more than the rust and the dark. The time came. A distant roar echoed through the decks, the sound of a desperate crowd and the sharp crackle of stun mauls. The diversion had begun. Kaelin, his face smeared with grime to hide his pallor, slipped into the maintenance corridor. The heat was immense, the air vibrating with the raw power flowing through the conduit beside him. The hum of the ship was a physical force here, a giant's heartbeat. He moved through the narrow space, his muscles screaming in protest, his mind focused on Anya's instructions. The signal in his head was a quiet guide now, a steadying presence. It showed him flashes of the path ahead, a brief shimmer on a loose handhold, a flicker of light from a failing joint. He reached the final junction, a sheer 50-meter climb up a service ladder that ran alongside the thrumming power conduit. He could see the blast door to the engineering spire above, a circle of salvation. As he began to climb, the signal surged again, a final, powerful vision. He saw the blue-green planet, but this time he saw the shadow more clearly. It was a fleet, a vast armada of ships, not human, their forms alien and menacing, hanging in orbit like predators. And he heard the voice again, the cold, ancient intelligence. It wasn't speaking to him. It was speaking to whatever was on that planet. And its message was one of finality, of judgment. The harvest is complete. Cleanse the field. He gasped, his grip slipping on the rungs. The vision wasn't a warning about Proxima Centauri. It was a memory. It was what had happened there. He hauled himself over the final ledge, his body trembling with exhaustion and terror, and landed on the platform before the engineering spire's entrance. The blast door was sealed tight. Standing before it, unmoving, was a figure in silver, ceremonial armor, holding a long, glowing power lance. A purifier. The mask was different from the enforcers, stylized to look like a sorrowful, weeping face. The figure didn't move, but Kalen felt its gaze lock onto him, a gaze that seemed to peel back his skin and look directly at the heresy burning in his soul. The void blight ends here. Scrapper. A voice, distorted and metallic, echoed from the mask. The ship demands a sacrifice. The Purifier's weeping mask was a mockery of the violence it promised. The power lance hummed, its glowing tip distorting the air with heat. Kalen's exhaustion was a heavy cloak, but fear was a shot of raw adrenaline. He was a scrapper. He didn't win fights. He survived situations. He glanced past the silver-clad zealot, at the massive power conduit he had just climbed. It was the ship's aorta, pulsing with the energy that kept their world from freezing. It was also his only weapon. The Purifier lunged, not with the brutish charge of an enforcer, but with the fluid, calculated grace of a true believer. The lance sliced the air where Kalen's head had been a second before. He scrambled back, the rebar in his hand feeling like a toothpick against a sword. "Your heresy is a sickness in the ship's spirit," the metallic voice intoned. "My faith is the cure." Kalen didn't answer. He dodged another strike, the heat from the lance scorching his sleeve. He wasn't trying to win, he was trying to position the Purifier. He feinted left, drawing the zealot closer to the main conduit. The ambient energy field was already making his teeth ache. For the armored Purifier, it would be even worse. The signal in his head, sensing his desperation, chose that moment to act. It wasn't a vision this time. It was a weapon. A targeted psychic burst. A needle of pure data aimed not at him, but at his opponent. The Purifier staggered, its perfectly balanced stance breaking for a fraction of a second. A tremor ran through its silver armor. Lies. The distorted voice gasped. "Skyfire. It burns." The zealot's faith was a shield, but the signal was a corrosive acid, eating at the edges of its certainty. Kalen saw his opening. It was the blind spot Anya had spoken of. Not in a patrol route, but in a man's soul. He didn't attack the Purifier. He attacked the ship. He lunged for a nearby maintenance panel, his fingers finding the emergency release for the conduit's magnetic shielding regulator. It was a failsafe, designed to prevent a catastrophic overload. He slammed his palm against it. For a single, terrifying second, the magnetic containment field around the power conduit wavered. The raw energy of the ship's heart, a torrent of controlled plasma, bulged outward. The air screamed. The Purifier, caught in the full force of the energy wave, was lifted from its feet. Its armor, designed to conduct and channel energy for its lance, became its coffin. The silver plating glowed cherry red, then white hot. The metallic voice let out a single digitized shriek that was abruptly cut short. The figure collapsed, a heap of slagged metal and cooked faith. The magnetic field snapped back into place, the hum of the conduit returning to its normal, thunderous rhythm. The blast door to the engineering spire hissed open, a reward for his violent blasphemy. Kalen stumbled through, the door sealing behind him. shutting out the scent of burnt circuits and zealotry. The world inside was one of profound shock. He had expected more of the same, more grime, more decay. Instead, he found a sanctuary of clean, cold air and quiet, purposeful light. The engineering spire was the ship's true brain, and it had been waiting. The walls were lined with glowing panels, displaying cascades of data in a language he didn't know but somehow understood. The air hummed with the smooth operation of machinery that had been maintaining itself, independent of the navigator's rituals, for centuries. This place wasn't dying, it was dormant. Dominating the center of the vast, cylindrical chamber was the ship's main reactor, a colossal sphere of contained energy that pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light, the true ship spirit. He walked towards it, a moth drawn to a star, and, as he did, a section of the wall beside him flickered to life. It was a holographic display, a star chart so detailed and vast it made Ilara's schematic look like a child's drawing. And at its center, blinking with a soft, red light, was the system labeled Proxima Centauri. The signal in his mind connected with the ship's systems, and the vision he had seen before played out again, not as a chaotic flash, but as a clear, horrifying recording. He saw the Wanderer arriving in the system. He saw the blue-green jewel of a planet, teeming with life and marked by the unmistakable geometric patterns of a civilization. But then he saw the cleansers, the fleet of shadows. Their ships, like shards of obsidian, blotted out the local sun. He witnessed their weapon, not a beam of light or a projectile, but a wave of reality-altering energy that simply unmade matter. Cities, forests, oceans, they didn't explode, they dissolved, their atoms unwriting themselves from existence. The planet was left a sterilized, barren rock. And he finally understood the terrible truth. The signal from the Wanderer was not a call to a new home. It was the probe's dying scream. It was the black box recording of a genocide. The Wanderer hadn't just observed this. It had been caught in the edge of the weapon's effect. Its systems were fried. Its mission protocols corrupted. But something else had happened. The probe's simple AI had been shattered and remade by the alien energy, fused with the data of the cleanser's weapon. It was no longer just a probe. It was an echo of its killer. The crystalline lattice he had seen growing on its hull was a physical manifestation of this change. The probe attempting to replicate the alien technology that had destroyed its target. The signal wasn't a map. It was a warning. An S, and a blueprint for a weapon all rolled into one. It was desperately trying to tell the Hearth what was out there, and in its corrupted, fractured state, it was also trying to prepare it, to upgrade its dormant systems, to turn the tomb into a warship, Hope. The fragile, flickering candle he had carried all this way was extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The universe was not empty and waiting. It was owned, and its landlords were genocidal. He was no longer a pilgrim seeking paradise. He was a janitor who had stumbled into a cosmic abattoir. His revelation was cut short by a ship-wide tremor. A new voice, smooth, authoritative, and dripping with sanctimonious fury, boomed from the spire's internal comm system. It was High Navigator Corvus. Children of the Hearth, the voice declared, amplified through every speaker in every corridor. The heretic, the agent of the Void Blight, has breached our sacred engineering spire. He has murdered a holy purifier and now seeks to sunder our world from within. He is not a messenger. He is an apocalypse. He will crack the hull, bleed our air, and cast our souls into the godless, frozen night. Seal the decks. Report any who dream the skyfire. The blight is a contagion, and it must be purged with righteous fire. The broadcast was a masterstroke of terror. Corvus had twisted Kalen's actions into a narrative of destruction. He wasn't just a heretic anymore, he was a monster, a saboteur. The dwellers, already frightened and confused, would turn on each other. Anya's network would be hunted down and exterminated. He was trapped. He had the truth, but Corvus had the pulpit. Kalen looked around the humming, vibrant chamber. He was in the ship's nervous system. He couldn't out-preach Corvus, but perhaps he could outmaneuver him. He found what he was looking for, a secondary communications node, an old system that bypassed the navigator's primary broadcast control. It was used for deep system diagnostics, a direct line to the ship's bones. He channeled the signal, no longer a passive recipient, but an active user. He focused his will, pushing the raw data from the Wanderer through the node. He didn't have the control to broadcast the full, complex vision, but he could send a feeling, a single, potent truth. He found Anya's network, a hidden frequency she had described to him, and pushed. He sent them the cold certainty of the cleansers. He sent them the image of the sterilized planet. He sent them the feeling of a vast, indifferent predator. And with it, he sent a single, clear message, not in his voice, but in the pure intent of the signal itself. The sky is not a promise. It is a warning. The enemy is not without, it is within. They lied to us. I am not cracking the hull. I am trying to arm it. The message shot through the ship's hidden networks, a whisper of truth in a hurricane of lies, in the crowded corridors of the lower decks. Anya and the other dreamers would feel it, a cold spike of terror and resolve. The civil war for the soul of the hearth had just begun, and Kalen, the scrapper from the bottom of the world, now stood at his heart, a reluctant prophet with a gospel of despair and a terrible, necessary call to arms. The message Kalen sent was not a sound, it was a shiver in the soul of the ship. Down in the teeming warrens of the lower decks, Anya felt it as a sudden, breathtaking cold. The fear she had been suppressing, the gnawing dread that the dreams of stars were a prelude to madness, was instantly replaced by a different, sharper terror. It was the clear, crystalline fear of a known enemy. She looked at the faces of the other dreamers huddled with her in the hidden alcove, and she saw the same horrified understanding dawn in their eyes. They had been praying for a savior to lead them to a promised land. Kalen's message told them there was no promised land, only a battlefield, and the savior they sought was not a guide, but a general. The lies of the navigators, the sacred cycle, the promise of the ship's spirit's benevolence, it all crumbled at once, leaving them naked and terrified in the face of an impossible truth. But with that terror came a ferocious, liberating clarity. They were not heretics, they were watchmen, and the wolf was already among the flock. High Navigator Corvus felt the psychic whisper as a physical violation, a blasphemous feedback loop in the hallowed halls of the spire. He staggered, one hand flying to his temple, the pristine white of his chambers suddenly feeling like a tomb. He could feel the faith of his followers wavering, a subtle tremor in the foundation of his power. Kalen was not just a saboteur, he was a rival prophet, preaching a gospel of despair that threatened to unravel centuries of carefully constructed dogma. Corvus moved to his central lectern, his face a mask of righteous fury. His voice, amplified and broadcast throughout the spire, held no trace of his momentary weakness. "The Blight has a voice," he thundered to the assembled purifiers, their silver masks reflecting his own zeal. "It speaks in lies. Wrapping its message of destruction in the guise of revelation, it seeks to turn brother against brother, to shatter our faith so that it may shatter our world. We will not allow it. We will march to the engineering spire. We will cut out this cancer at its heart. This is not an execution. This is an exorcism." His words were a balm to their shaken faith. The purifiers raised their power lances in unison, the hum of their weapons a hymn of impending violence. They were the ship's immune system, and they were about to purge the infection. Kalen watched them coming. On the holographic display, he saw a river of silver icons flowing from the spire, descending through the transit shafts with methodical speed. There were dozens of them. He was one man, a scrapper who had survived by being invisible, now cornered in the most visible place on the ship. But he had the ship's nervous system at his fingertips. He was no longer just inside the machine. He was the ghost in it. His hands flew across the glowing control surfaces. He was not a trained engineer, but his scrapper's intuition for how systems connected, how they failed, and how they could be broken served him better. He began to weave his defense. He rerouted primary coolant through secondary pipes, priming them to vent superheated steam into key junctions. He found the controls for the localized gravity plates in the corridors leading to the spire and set them to fluctuate, turning solid ground into a treacherous, unpredictable sea. He accessed the ship's dormant internal defense grid, a network of automated fire suppression turrets, and began the slow, arduous process of overriding their safety protocols. The ship fought him at every turn, its ancient systems locked down by safeguards and navigator passcodes. But the signal from the Wanderer was a master key, a sliver of alien logic that bypassed human limitations. With every system he co-opted, he felt the ship waking up a little more, its deeper mechanical slumber disturbed by his frantic preparations. The first wave of purifiers reached the main corridor leading to the spire's entrance. They moved in perfect formation, a phalanx of silver and blue light. Kalen watched them on the monitor, his heart a cold, heavy knot in his chest. He took a breath and slammed his hand on a control panel. Far down the corridor, a series of vents erupted, releasing a torrent of pressurized, scalding steam. The purifier's armor protected them from the heat, but their optical sensors were instantly blinded. Their perfect formation broke as they stumbled through the whiteout. Kalen followed up, activating the gravity plates. The floor beneath the zealots buckled and warped. One moment they were in standard gravity. The next, they weighed 3 times as much, their knees buckling under the strain. Then, the gravity reversed, and they were flung against the ceiling, their armored forms crashing against the metal with concussive force. It was a chaotic, brutal ballet of physics, and it bought him time. But the purifiers were relentless. They adapted, their leaders shouting commands through the chaos, guiding their squads through the hazards. They used their power lances to melt through sealed blast doors and their faith to push through the disorienting gravity fields. They were an army of true believers, and they were winning. While Kalen fought his desperate battle of systems, Anya ignited a different kind of fire in the lower decks. She and the other dreamers spread Kalen's message, not as a broadcast, but as a whispered truth from person to person. They spoke not of hope, but of survival. The navigators promised you a gentle God, she told a crowd of frightened dwellers huddled in the market. But their God is a liar, and its priests are shepherds leading you to a slaughter you can't even see. The man in the spire is not trying to kill us. He is trying to wake us up before the real butchers arrive. Her words, backed by the chilling echo of Kalen's psychic warning, found fertile ground in the dwellers' fear. The purge had been too brutal. Corvus's rhetoric too hysterical. They began to question. Small acts of defiance erupted across the lower decks. A maintenance crew accidentally shut down the power to a navigator precinct. A food distribution center lost the rations destined for the enforcers. The dwellers began to build barricades, not to attack, but to defend their communities from the navigator patrols, creating zones of autonomy in the heart of the ship's oppressed populace. It was a slow, messy, and bloody awakening, but it was happening. The ship was no longer just a world, it was a civil war. Kalen watched the silver icons on his map inch ever closer. He had thrown everything he could at them, but they were almost at the final door. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead where a console had exploded from a power feedback loop. He was exhausted, his mind frayed from the constant interface with the ship and the signal. He was out of tricks. He looked at the reactor core, its steady, peaceful pulse a stark contrast to the violence outside. Then he looked at the data streaming from the Wanderer's signal. It was more than just a recording. It was a blueprint. It contained the schematics for the cleanser's reality-altering weapon, the principles of its energy source, the impossible physics that made it work. The signal had been trying to do more than just warn him. It had been trying to teach the ship how to build a sword. He saw a new set of commands he hadn't dared to touch, a protocol labeled systemic integration. It wasn't about controlling the ship's existing systems. It was about fundamentally changing them, about using the reactor's massive energy output to reconfigure the hearth on a molecular level, to turn its hull into armor, its sensors into weapons, to integrate the alien blueprint into its very being. It was an insane gamble. The process could overload the reactor, turning the entire ship into a short-lived star. It could tear the hull apart. It could work, but transform the hearth into something as monstrous as the cleansers themselves. He heard the sizzle of a power lance cutting through the final blast door. He had seconds. He thought of the sterilized planet, of Ilara's faith, of Anya's sacrifice. He was a scrapper, and this was the ultimate salvage. He would either reclaim humanity's future from the wreckage of its past, or he would die trying. He placed his hands on the primary interface of the reactor core. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and sent the command. Integrate. The world ended. The steady hum of the engineering spire became a rising, deafening scream. Every light on the ship went out, plunging all 500 kilometers of the hearth into absolute, terrifying darkness. A wave of pure energy, a physical shock wave, erupted from the reactor, throwing Kalen across the chamber. He slammed into the far wall and knew no more. Throughout the ship, from the spire to the Hullgrave, every soul was thrown from their feet as the great machine bucked like a dying animal. A deep, structural groan echoed through its spine, the sound of a world being torn apart and remade. In the darkness, a new light began to glow, not from the lumen panels, but from the walls themselves. A faint, crystalline, blue lattice that spread through the metal like frost, a perfect echo of the alien corruption that had overgrown the Wanderer. The hearth was not a ship anymore. It was becoming something else. The darkness was absolute, but it was not silent. It was filled with a single, rising tone, a note of immense power that resonated in the fillings of every dweller's teeth and the marrow of every navigator's bones. For a terrifying, eternal moment, the 500 kilometers of the hearth was a silent tomb once more, adrift and lightless. Then, the transformation Kalen had initiated began in earnest. It was not a mechanical process, it was a biological one, as if the ship were a chrysalis and the alien data its metamorphic imperative. Throughout the vessel, the metal groaned and shifted. Bulkheads, once rusted and pitted, began to flow like liquid mercury, their molecular structure realigning, becoming denser, stronger, their surfaces taking on the faint, iridescent sheen of the cleanser's technology. The air, once stale and recycled, became crisp and charged with ozone, purified by systems that no longer filtered but rewrote the very composition of the atmosphere. The lumen panels did not flicker back to life. Instead, the strange, blue crystalline lattice that had erupted from the core spread through the ship's skin, pulsing with a soft, internal luminescence. The hearth was no longer lit. It was alive with light. Kalen awoke to a world reborn. The engineering spire was unrecognizable. The hard angles of consoles and panels had softened into smooth, organic curves. The central reactor no longer pulsed with contained energy. It now shone with the steady, brilliant light of a captive star. He pushed himself up, his body aching, and saw his own reflection in a newly formed wall. He was changed. The gash on his forehead was gone, healed over without a scar. His eyes, once the dull gray of a scrapper who lived in darkness, now held a faint, blue luminosity. He could feel the ship, not as a system to be controlled, but as an extension of his own body, its thoughts, its processes, its newfound power. They were all an open book to him. He could feel the confusion and terror of the purifiers, trapped in a corridor that was now a shifting, Escher-like puzzle of their own making. He could feel the dawning awe and hope of Anya and the Dreamers as they watched their world reshape itself around them. And he could feel High Navigator Corvus, alone in the spire, his faith shattered, screaming at a god that had been replaced by a ghost. Corvus watched his sacred spire, the pinnacle of his world, transform into something alien and blasphemous. The white, sterile walls were now veined with the glowing blue lattice. His lectern, from which he had preached for decades, had dissolved and reformed into a smooth, featureless altar that hummed with a power he did not understand. The ship was no longer his. The faith he had wielded as a weapon was now a useless relic. He was a king in a kingdom that had vanished overnight. In his rage and despair, he found his last reserve of zeal. He would not allow this awakening. If he could not have the ship, no one would. He made his way to the bridge, the one place even he had feared to tread, the sealed heart of the original mission. His ancestors had locked it down, declaring it a place of temptation and heresy, a direct link to the godless void. But Corvus now understood. It was not a place of temptation. It was a place of power. It contained the ship's ultimate failsafe, the main reactor's self-destruct sequence. Anya and the Dwellers emerged from their barricaded homes into a new world. The oppressive, Grimy corridors were gone, replaced by gently glowing, spacious halls. The air was clean, the light was soft, and a feeling of profound peace settled over them. The Civil War was over before it had truly begun. The purifiers were trapped, their armor useless, their faith broken by a miracle they could not comprehend. The enforcers had simply laid down their weapons, their authority meaningless in a world that no longer obeyed the old rules. But their awe was cut short by a new psychic message from Kalen. It was not a warning this time, but a plea. He's going to the bridge. He's going to destroy us all. I can't stop him from here. Kalen, connected as he was to the ship, could feel Corvus's intent, a suicidal spike of hatred aimed at the reactor core. But the bridge was shielded, its systems isolated from the rest of the ship, a final protocol from the original builders to prevent a hostile takeover. He could not hack it. Someone had to get there physically. The race to the bridge was a desperate, chaotic scramble. Anya led a group of dreamers and newly converted dwellers, their knowledge of the ship's hidden paths their only advantage. They surged upward, their path lit by the ship's own glowing skin. But Corvus had the advantage of proximity and a direct route. Kalen did what he could to slow him down. He sealed blast doors in the navigator's path, but Corvus, armed with a purifier's power lance, melted through them. Kalen warped the corridors, but Corvus, driven by a madman's purpose, navigated the shifting architecture with terrifying speed. Anya reached the antechamber to the bridge moments after Corvus had sealed the final massive door behind him. They could hear the hum of the ancient lock engaging. They were too late. Inside, Corvus found himself in a place out of time. The bridge was pristine, untouched by the centuries of decay. A wide viewport, dark and dormant, dominated the forward wall. A single command chair sat before a console that glowed with a soft red standby light. "You have forsaken me," Corvus whispered to the silent ship as he approached the console. He placed his hand on it, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a single, ominous prompt: initiate catastrophic reactor destabilization. He did not hesitate. He was about to confirm the command when a new voice, calm and impossibly ancient, spoke from the ship's speakers. "That course of action is inadvisable. High Navigator." Corvus spun around. Standing behind the command chair, where there had been nothing but empty space a second before, was a figure. It was humanoid, but its form was woven from the same blue, crystalline light that now coursed through the ship. It was Kalen, but it was also something more. He had done the impossible. He hadn't just connected with the ship, he had projected his consciousness into it, creating a temporary avatar of light and data. "Abomination!" Corvus shrieked, raising his power lance. "You are the void blight made flesh. I am what you forced me to become." Kalen's avatar replied, its voice the calm, resonant hum of the ship itself. "You preached of a spirit, Corvus. You were right. You just never realized it was waiting for a soul." Corvus lunged, his lance passing harmlessly through the light form of the avatar. At the same moment, the bridge's main viewport, the great dark eye that had been blind for centuries, shuddered open. For the first time in generations, the inhabitants of the hearth saw the outside. They saw the endless, beautiful, terrifying blackness of space, filled with the diamond dust of 1,000,000,000 stars. On the other side of the door, Anya and the others gasped as the image was projected onto the corridor walls. Throughout the ship, Every glowing surface, every wall and ceiling became a window to the cosmos. The sight broke Corvus. He fell to his knees, the power lance clattering to the floor. The vast, silent, and utterly indifferent reality of the universe was a truth too great for his narrow faith to bear. He was an insect, screaming his piety into a hurricane. Kalen's avatar walked to the viewport and looked out at the star field. The real Kalen, still in the engineering spire, was connected to it, seeing through its eyes. They were not just adrift, they were moving. The integration had not just transformed the ship, it had reignited its dormant, non-Newtonian drive. The hearth was under power for the first time in 500 years, but it was not heading towards Proxima Centauri. The signal from the Wanderer, now fully understood by the ship's awakened consciousness, was guiding them on a new course. The warning had been heeded. The blueprint had been used. The hearth was not running to a new home. It was a warship now, its hull forged in alien fire, its soul a human scrapper who had stared into the abyss. It was running to the source of the signal, to the heart of the shadow, to the home of the cleansers. It was going hunting. Kalen, the boy from the bottom of the world, stood on the bridge of his newborn starship, a silent promise echoing in the void. Humanity had been culled and forgotten, its children left to die in a tin can. But one of them had just woken up, and he remembered everything.